Good evening. She was born on May 1st, 1928, and married a handsome man of Italian descentage. And they were married in 1949 and had two beautiful children. And those two beautiful children grew up and one had a kid who was me. Who am I talking about? Well, tonight on episode 2 of The Legacy of Queens, we're tributing a very special woman who was born and raised in the early part of her life in Brooklyn, and then her and her family moved out to the Queens area and have been Queens residents until she came down to Florida and passed on this date, July 16th, 14 years ago, back in 2006. Tonight on The Legacy of Queens, we are tributing my grandmother, Josephine FRANZE, on episode 2. Stay tuned. It's going to be a great show. Thank you very much. All right. Oh, you're too kind. Yes. Thank you very much, folks. Yes. And I want to thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for a great introduction and a great applause for episode number 2 of The Legacy of Queens. Tonight we tribute the grandmother, mother, aunt, however else, the woman who left a legacy in Queens. She was a factory worker, homemaker, but she loved her family, loved her friends, and did everything in her power to make people happy. And she leaves a legacy of 92 years, something that today not many people can get to that point. But she passed away 14 years ago at the age of 78. She would have been 92 this past May if she was still alive today. I'm tributing my grandmother, Josephine FRANZE Lavigny. She was born May 1st, 1928, and was born in Brooklyn, which is an interesting time when the Depression was pretty much a year before the Depression. The family of the Lavignys was a big family. And she came from a family of 9 brothers and 2 sisters, herself and her sister Vera. And she had 9 brothers who were all my great uncles. And they were great people. And though I never met my great-great-grandparents, except for the great-grandfather who passed away in 1983, Gaetano, it's understanding to know that the love of that family is what was important back in the days, especially during the Depression times. But they got through. And even though my grandmother tried not to remember the Depression as much as she did, she lived through it, went to school, but had to quit because of taking care of her younger brothers and making sure that they got the care that they needed. Life was hard back then in the 20s and 30s. And my grandmother always had a smile on her face from what I was told. Some of the images may not be too clear because, remember, folks, I was born in 1977 and she was 50 at the time. She got married in 1949 to her wonderful man, my grandfather, Vincent Joseph FRANZE. Everybody called him Jimmy, his nickname. And he was a gas station owner, auto mechanic, insurance man, and they had 2 kids, Mother Teresa and my Aunt Donna. Teresa came first in 1951, March 25th, and Aunt Donna came 6 years later in 1957 on March 6th. And they lived in Queens. When my grandfather and grandmother got married, they found a house on 112th Street and realized this is where they're going to settle down. And they did everything in their power to make home a place of love, compassion, and just sit back and enjoy life. My grandfather, according to my grandmother, was a great man. A hard worker, provided for his family, did everything he could, always had a smile on his face. And my grandmother, taking care of the house, never drove a car, but always walked to the store, taking a push cart with her to do the daily shopping. Both parents raised 2 daughters, and they grew up. And one daughter had a son, and that's me. So my grandmother, after my grandfather died in 1972, was heartbroken. 5 years before I was born. So she had to go to work, and she took a job in a factory, sewing dresses, hemming pants, making clothes for the people of Ozone Park. And yet she lived in Richmond Hill at that time and had a house on 108th Street. The house that I eventually wound up in 6 months after I was born, as my mother decided to take me out of the house that we were in and to live with my grandmother from that point on for the next 17 years, and then to come down here to Florida, where we reside now, for 25. In that time, my grandmother worked in the factory up until about 1983, and then decided to quit and take care of me full time. Because my mother, as a single parent, and as you all know, single parents have a tough when it comes to working and taking care of however many children they have. Life in the late 70s and early 80s was tough even for me growing up. The honesty and the peer pressure was a tough decision to have to go through. And walking through to go to school through the tough neighborhoods really made a difference, made me aware of my surroundings, and made me respect Queens even more. And here we are 25 years later talking about it, since we've been down here since 1995. Josephine Franz was a homemaker, a damn good cook, Sunday meatballs, chicken cutlets, whatever the case. We ate good. And my grandmother, best damn cook you could ever possibly want to have. If you were friends with her, you were friends for life. If you were enemies of her, well, let's just put it this way. She would have never said a word to you. She wouldn't have raised her voice, but she would always give you the silent treatment and it'll look like I'm not going there. So, best to be on her good side, because She has been stirred too many times, and that's why she gave respect to those who gave respect back to her. And she walked everywhere. Never learned how to drive a car, didn't need it, especially in New York, especially in that area of Richmond Hill and South Ozone Park. Sometimes she would take the train to work. Sometimes she'd take the bus. Most of the time, though, she walked. And the slideshow presentation of pictures that I have that you'll see when we put this on YouTube pretty much indicate how happy she was. With the last picture, Christmas 1991, where I'm with her, my Uncle Sonny Ferry, and my Aunt Nikki. That's a happy time picture. It was hard to kind of get pictures to put in the slideshow. Most of the time, me and my gram would not be able to pose for pictures. We did, but most of the time it was with somebody else. And I wanted to keep her legacy on focus with some and respect the privacy of others. But I also have two very important pictures to share with you as well, too. And you'll see those pictures, of course, in the slideshow presentation. The early pictures of her and my grandfather will be at the beginning of the show. And Christmas 1991 will be the last picture on the slideshow presentation. And then there were a couple of other ones when we were down in Florida. We'll come back up to visit people as well. So I'll add those pictures in as well. Some of the great memories I remember of my grandmother. We used to play ball in the backyard, wiffle ball, catch. She would teach me a lot of things. She was very proud of me. And she raised me as a surrogate father because my father decided to not take responsibility and be part of my life. So my grandmother played the surrogate father for the 28 years that I knew her. She always guided me. And yeah, I gave her a hard time, like all kids do. I got hit and hit badly sometimes, but it made me strong. It made me realize, don't take stuff from people. She always warned me about not talking to strangers, the good versus the bad, and the ugly. She never sugarcoated anything. She was very firm in her beliefs. Not much of a religious person, though she did go to church to watch me as an altar server. And I really do remember those times when she sat on the side of the church watching me serve 5 o'clock mass. She walked me to school up until the 5th grade. She bought me pizza. She took care of me, took care of our family. We always had a hot meal. Holidays were so special. When she passed on this date 14 years ago, it was like a piece of my heart broke. And I always will, to this date, pay tribute to her passing. Some say that this particular episode is not going to get popularity because of the fact that this is a woman who pretty much is just an ordinary woman who took care of her family, not because she had to. She chose to, and she wanted to. She wasn't forced to, and she did it out of her own will and the good heart that she had. And she passed that on to her children and her only grandchild, me. And as I look back at some of these pictures, I am reminded of the things that I miss doing with her, like sitting at the dinner table and just talking. Most of the time, a good grandmother or a grandparent will listen. to their grandchildren. Just talk. Let them talk. And that's what I did. And that's what she did. Sometimes we stayed up till past midnight because I used to get home late from work. I never gave my grandmother enough credit. I always gave her respect, but I always felt like I could have done more. You know, and sometimes when you lose someone who's close to you, like a parent or a grandparent, you feel as though you haven't given enough love and honor and respect. And surely I could have been a better grandkid. Although my grandmother would say differently if she was still alive today. She would say that he was an honor and a privilege to watch him grow. I took care of him when he was a baby. I loved him just as much as his mother did, if not more. Sometimes the bond between a grandparent and a grandchild is not as close as we would want it to be. Other times, they can't be pulled apart. It just depends on the circumstances and how much of an effort the grandparents put in to make sure that their grandkids, their children, are well taken care of, well fed, well clothed. If you could have the time with your grandparent back, what would you do differently? Would you change things around? Would you grow on it? Would you further enhance the relationship, make it more special, more meaningful? Whether your grandparents are here or not, know that they love you and that you are one of a kind in their eyes. And I know that my grandmother is looking down on me every day, and I never forget the important dates, the important memories, many of the things that she has given me as she is now in heaven. It's hard to believe that somebody has gone so long, and yet the time is flying by so fast. Most of the time I was a good kid. And I'll admit that I drove her up a wall. But one cannot say that any kid would drive their parents or their grandparents up a wall without admitting it. And if you don't want to admit it and think you were an angel child, yet had a dark side, you're probably missing the point of the whole issue. Good or bad, our grandparents and our parents do the best they can to make sure we have a good quality of life. And they pass on what was given to them. And my grandmother's brothers, great guys, great uncles. Everybody in the family of the Lavignes is now in heaven, with my Uncle Steve as the last one who passed. And I always kidded with my grandmother. I said, if you could outlast all 9 of your brothers, you would make history to the state. But unfortunately, she didn't outlast the youngest. Well, actually, she did. But the one that stayed alive the longest was my Uncle Steve. But all the brothers had a personality to them. My grandmother also had a personality too. She could stare at the TV, yell at it, say what program she was watching, and tell the TV to go to hell. She could be watching a sports game sitting on the edge of her seat, cheering the team on. One time she was walked into the dark bedroom up in New York, and she was trying to close the window for the night, and she fell in a box. And she sat there laughing. I turned the light on, and there she is in the box, and she just laughed. I said, "What happened?" She said, I fell in the box." Yep. The woman did a lot. And for some, that again would argue the point that she doesn't have much of a legacy. I beg to disagree with that. It's not how much you've accomplished in your time here on Earth. It's what you did with that time, who you interacted with, and how you made an impact by your emotions, your attitudes, your passion. Though the few things that she did, and she did them well, she always gave her love, her honor, her promises, and her respect to those who gave it back to her. And yes, there were times that we did not talk for a certain amount of weeks, because I have probably said something to her that upset her at one time or another. But, you know, that doesn't make me a bad person. But I learned that words do have an effect on people, regardless of whether they're close to you or not. And you must take those words, swallow them, and do something better to change the situation. There were times when I used to go with my mom and see other people, and my grandmother was at home, and I missed her so much because the times that we were away from each other were the hardest. I know some would say that that's kind of a clingy kind of a mentality, but you have to understand, if you love someone that much, parent or grandparent, they love that. And that's important to your growth, your mind mentality, how much you really care for that person. And I cared very deeply for Josephine Franz. I didn't really get to say goodbye to her because she had passed away in her sleep at the nursing facility that she was laid to rest at. That final morning, I remember waking up at 9 o'clock on the 16th, which was today, or the Sunday morning. Didn't really get much sleep because I knew that it was pretty much just a matter of when the official time and date of her passing was. When I got up in the morning, my mother was on the phone calling everybody who she had their number to let them know that she had passed. And we had to fly out the next day on the 17th to New York. The funeral was on the 19th. And I, with my 4.5 to 5 years of experience as an altar server, did the one thing, stood up to the plate, took the initiative, and served Mass at her funeral. You guessed it. I put the alb on, tied the cincture, and proceeded with the priest at the funeral mass. After not having putting an alb on in over 13 years, I was very nervous, but I do remember the order of the Mass, how it goes, how to set up, and how to clean up. I was also in charge of choosing the music and the readings for the Mass itself. My mother was in charge of the funeral preparations. We combined our efforts and gave my grandmother the best wake and funeral she ever had. We buried her at All Faith Cemetery with her husband, Vincent FRANZE. And she is there today. And suffice it to say, I hope to get to New York this year, this October, to go up there and finally pay respects to this woman who not only raised me as a surrogate father and grandmother, but took time out of her busy schedule to make sure that I was well taken care of. And for that, I am sorry that I did not get back to New York sooner. And I'm probably wondering to myself why you didn't go back sooner. And probably could have made excuses, which I probably am. So this year, I hope in the year 2020 to get there and do what is needed to make it a whole again. So if I sounded like I was going off on a tangent, it's just because the memories I have of my grandmother in this short amount of time, words
Don't forget to subscribe to the David3000 Network for great more content like this one.